When I was 13, I ruined a woman's marriage over a video game because she fell in love with me. I then realized what a huge mistake I've made. I had a really, really bad childhood. Like, I've only had 5 years of school in my life, but I don't want to get into details there. When I was around 13, I started playing an MMO called Dark Age of Camelot. Now, when I played these games, I would normally tell people I was in my early 20s because kids just don't get respect online. I later went on to lead raids with hundreds of people in attendance and was gifted a sword that could have sold for close to $1,000 or more at the time for my work. So I was pretty good at keeping up the ruse. Anyway, I met a 22-year-old girl one night in a dungeon, and we ended up hitting it off and becoming really good friends really quickly. We started playing with each other for hours every night, and usually her husband would join us. After a while, I would get bummed out if I hopped on and she was offline. Important to note that this was before the days of Discord, although I had a really deep voice at 13, so I might have been able to fool people. Over time, we started getting closer, and one night she told me she was starting to catch feelings. I was young and really didn't know what to do, and being in the dark place I was as a kid made the absolute wrong decision. I should have told her then that I was underage, and it might have prevented a lot of heartache for both of us. Instead, I told her I felt the same way. It escalated from there, obviously, until one day she told me she loved me. I'd never heard anyone say that to me in my life before, or told anyone I loved them. We just didn't do that in my house. In 32 years, I've never even heard my mom say it. I realized I felt the same way, and now stuff was spiraling out of control. I was a super depressed kid, and this set me over the edge. I was in way over my head, and the guilt from letting this woman fall in love with a child she thought was a man was too much, and I spent 4 days in bed without eating. I just laid there thinking about how I was going to have to tell this woman what was going on, no matter how bad the aftermath would be. And so I finally told her. I told her I was actually 14 and explained why I lied to begin with. I told her I never meant to trick her or play with her emotions, and that I'd gotten in over my head, and by the time I realized that I was in so deep I couldn't get out. I told her I was sorry for hurting her, and that I understood if she never wanted to talk to me again. When I was done, I fully expected to never hear from her again. Instead, she told me that she was disappointed, and a little hurt that I'd lied, but she understood. More surprisingly, she told me it didn't change how she felt, and that she was willing to wait for me to turn legal. This was completely opposite of how I expected all of this to turn out, but obviously I was all in. For the next year and a half, we spoke every day for hours about just about anything you can think of. Also, for the first time in my life, I had someone who I knew genuinely cared about me, and I liked that feeling. Eventually, her husband found out what was really going on by digging through her chat logs, but they'd been having problems and she wanted a divorce. He got super drunk on New Year's, and she ended up locking herself in a room while he banged on the door, screaming at her to call me. All that fun stuff. She left him, and that problem was out of the picture. On top of everything else, she was a hugely positive influence on me. I had dropped out after a few months of 9th grade, and was hanging with some truly terrible people. She'd been through a bit of that herself, and helped me navigate some seriously treacherous waters. For instance, she told me unequivocally not to try meth, and encouraged me to stop messing with crack for the brief week, or so I used it. She'd shared with me the story about how she was assaulted by a guy at a party when she was a teenager. When a former friend of mine tried to force themselves onto a girl at my house at a party when she passed out, I didn't really know what to do. They had been making out before she passed out, so when I heard her head hit the floor and him trying to wake her up, I knew he would be upset. But when I remembered her story and how it impacted her, any indecision about what to do dissipated, and I told my friend, I can't let you do that, and carried her into my sister's room. He kept trying to get in, so I ended up staying in there, locking the door, and sitting in front of it all night until she woke up. Meanwhile, my friend was stealing all my PlayStation games. Anyway, it all went great until I went to jail. My dad had tried to rough me up, and I pushed him off me and told him not to touch me. And he ran and called the cops and told them I hit him. I was charged with assault and locked up for about 30 days with 60 days of house arrest. We still talked through all this time, and everything was fine for the most part. But a week or so after I got out of jail, she dumped me. Her best friend had gotten in her ear and told her that she'd lose all respect for her if she slept with me, which makes sense in hindsight because I was 15, but I digress. We still talked for months afterwards, but eventually she found someone else and poof, she was gone. It wasn't a cold-hearted thing. I knew she still cared for me, but I think it had dawned on her at some point the reality of what she was doing. If the roles were reversed, I reckon I'd be in prison. I'd never heard someone cry the way she did when she broke up with me. She couldn't even speak. Everything fell off the rails for me for a while after this. I felt like there was a hole in my heart that would never close. I did a whole lot of drugs and alcohol trying to numb the pain, but it just made it worse. I couldn't even get away from her in my sleep. Every night was either a beautiful dream where we were finally together and happy, or nightmares I'd wake up from nearly in tears of her with her now husband. It went on for years, and gradually the pain subsided to a point it was manageable, but the wound never healed. I still think about her and see her in my sleep from time to time. I got myself together finally, and almost 15 years after we last spoke, I finally heard from her again. I don't even remember now how we crossed paths again. She'd had a couple more kids and was still married. I had a girlfriend and a kid on the way. It didn't take long before we were talking every day again through encrypted messaging services. Didn't take long before we started getting deep again. It took maybe 2 months before I heard her say something I'd come to terms with never hearing again a decade ago: I love you. She wasn't happy with her marriage, and I was quickly beginning to hate my now ex. My ex developed a major drug problem after she had our kid, and eventually I ended up with full custody. But that's a different story. We kept it up for a couple weeks, until one day I just couldn't deal with the guilt anymore. Was I really going to break up this woman's marriage again? How would I even be able to go to Utah to be with her with a kid? Am I going to be this selfish to break up her kid's home again? No, not this time. So I did the hardest thing I've ever done and sent her a message explaining why we couldn't speak anymore. That I was sorry, but I had to go, and I deleted the app and all my accounts on things I used to talk to her. I never even gave her a chance to reply, because I knew if she did I would change my mind, and I didn't want to live with this on my conscience. It's been about 5 years now since I disappeared, but I did send her a message via Facebook. I'd seen from her posts on Facebook that she was battling depression and some real-life issues. So I sent her a message, hoping maybe it would help. I told her that she was the most important person in my life. I told her that if she hadn't come along when she did, I'd be dead or in prison. I told her that when she'd come along that I felt like I was always surrounded by darkness, and that she was a candle in the dark that led me out of it. I explained why I had to go, that it wasn't because I wanted to, but because I needed to if I wanted to live with myself day to day. And then I deleted my Facebook and disappeared again. Now, almost 20 years since we met, I'd still drop everything to be with her if she were single. She's the most beautiful woman I've ever seen, and funny and kind and everything warm and right in the world. I've come to terms with the fact we'll never be together, but the thought of what could have been or if things were different haunts me and hangs over every relationship I've had. Another time, another life. Man, I swear we would have been great. The biggest regret in my life is that I'll never get to meet the person who completely changed my life and taught me how to love and be loved. I'll never get to say thank you. I'll never get to see her, to hug her and get close to that warmth and source of light that drove me through the hardest times in my life. I'll go to my grave holding this regret, and when I've contemplated death in the afterlife, all I've wanted from my personal heaven is a chance to finally see her and say thank you. If you made it all the way through this, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story. Let me know your thoughts about it in the comments, and thanks for listening.